Hi, it's Wake Up with KC, and today I want to talk about something that I feel led to talk about. And I've had other guests on my show, to discuss about, you know, the Akashic Records, numerology. And here's the thing, where we are at today, what if it is a belief in a program that we've been running and operating in, and it's really a false identity of who we are. And how can we honestly find truth of who we are? What if there was a key and the Akashic Records, your soul contract, if you want to call it that, has the clues and the keys to help guide you, and you have a way of finding out your purpose of why you came here in the first place? Please welcome Clayton Kateri.
How
Welcome, Clayton.
how you doing?
I'm doing great now that I have you on this show because I've always been open minded.
I love it.
And, I'd like to ask you if you went down this journey and then had these questions like, okay, something ain't right here. What the hell's going on? Who am I? And why am I here?
Yeah. And a short answer, yes. And a little bit longer of an answer. I mean, I, there's a level of kind of just going with the flow, doing what you're told. And there was always a little bit piece of me, because I think when I was younger, I was a bit more introverted. If you told me I was going to be a podcast host, I would have probably never believed you whenever I was like in middle school or even high school. And there was always this like little poke of, but why? And I think along the way, I was kind of told to just accept things as they were. Don't really question the status quo. That's not what you do. And it's funny because I still get challenged on stuff like that today, which is awesome. I love it. I love if I say something and people challenge it, because that gives me an opportunity to expand my awareness as well. And I don't want to dive into too much of the juicy stuff yet, but I guess just at a high level, there's always been a little bit of questioning, but the last maybe year, last 2 years, I've really pushed the envelope with questioning, asking why, like, why do we accept certain things? Like, anything from saying, why do we accept why something's black and white? Why is, this the way it is at a general level? Why is that true? I think that merely asking that question with anything that feels like that question needs to be asked has opened up, let's say, the Akashic records for me in my life. It's been fascinating.
Wow. And would it be safe to say that, because I always talk about like the limited beliefs, the programming, and it goes from generation to generation to generation, just getting passed down. And then when you come into into this earth realm, you're already told by your parents. They actually teach you what they believe. They probably never even questioned their beliefs. They just, this is the way it is, like you said earlier, you know, and you don't even challenge them, because then there's this, obey your parents kind of thing. Well, I question, well, well, they believe that. I question it. And then it's like you get shut down or you get punished for actually questioning their own beliefs. And that creates a
Mm,
trauma. Wouldn't you agree?
100%. 100%. And where my mind's going, because we talked about this in the green room beforehand, is the realm of religion. And I was brought up Presbyterian, and I had a whole thing of questioning that along my way. Um, Currently, for anyone who's interested, I try not to identify with any specific religion or ideology. I'm just open. I'm open to new information. Um, but the reason I bring that up is because we were talking about the idea of God fearing. And the basis of that is really interesting, because people believe that it is supposed to mean, respect and reverence. And this is something I'm trying to put together myself right now. And this is becoming because it comes from a Hebrew word which meant fear and reverence. However, for some reason, we have kept propagating this idea of fear as opposed to being respect God. Like, I'm God fearing. It's not like I'm God respecting. Like, that just is completely different in my opinion. But the reason I bring this up is because culturally speaking, we have always viewed God as a masculine figure. And where I see that this has played out in our society is with parenting. And if you look at, I know this happened in my childhood for sure, where my dad, it's like, you know, if he was able to make me afraid of something, then it meant that I respected him, or I respected his decision, or I respected his viewpoint. And I feel like that this had to have started from a place, in my opinion, in my life, it started in a place of the church where it's like, well, you fear the father. And it's like, if your kid fears you, then that means that they respect you. And I feel like that couldn't be further from the truth. And,
No.
and to what you're saying, it keeps us down in a lower vibration. It keeps us below the vibration of fear. It's like fear is now our highest point, and everything that's below fear is essentially like shame, guilt, grief, apathy. And it's like, if you want to ascend that, you need to be able to ascend the fear of it. And it's like, in an ideal world, we should just embrace unconditional love. And it's like, accept the fact we might not know everything, embrace unconditional love, because I think at some level parents want to show that, but then they choose the modality of fear to show it, where that's a lower frequency. And maybe I'm getting a little far down the rabbit hole, but um, that's kind of where, and I wanted to bring it back to the parents because that seemed like where your question was coming from.
Well, but then I look at, okay, they were taught by their parents. They were taught
Mm,
by their parents, and like, how far back does this go? You
right.
know, and what when you mentioned about the father and whatnot, and like fear as respect, I looked at it as more of fear in order to control and dominate,
Mm,
that fear. Because then if you look, oh, God is love. God loves all his children. I'm like, well, then why is it that in certain other scriptures that, oh, he punished, he raped, he murdered women and children?
right. It's
Look
powerful
it up in
stuff.
Deuteronomy.
And
And
even
I'm
if you
like,
look at,
that's not God. I don't know, like, who would even think, like, knowing what I know now, being in this earth realm right now, seeing, the wars, the gun violence and everything. And I'm like, this isn't God. This is man. This is ego. This is what fear, control, manipulation, power does when you're operating under that fear.
mm,
So, what is the opposite of fear? Love. So, how do we know what actually love is? Love is an energy, emotion, a feeling, very at a what, 900 and something frequency. So if fear is the highest one, what is the lowest one? And it's like, okay, I'm seeing this. I'm like, well, and like what you said earlier is like, we're all taught that this God is a man form. But what if, what was in the Bible, it wasn't really God. It was somebody that was appointed God, or someone who thought this God came from the sky. But what if it was a alien, an ET, a highly evolved being that just decided to come to planet Earth, knowing what we know now?
yeah. And I mean, it's certainly, God's an interesting word. And I think it's something that can take delicacy in order for us to articulate in the first place. Because the way that I've started to view the world, especially through a lens of energy, is that God is, the way that I use the word God is in reverence to all the energy that makes up this physical universe, the universal energy, which would be everything from me to you to someone who's listening, to the phone that the person is listening to this on, to the microphone that I'm using, to the animals outside. So what gets interesting from that perspective is that how can you have a story that involves God? Because if God is the universal energy of everything, then the book, then a story, if you go to start to tell a story, the energy of that story is a piece of God. So now if you want to put somebody in that story named God, it's not really God. It's a subfraction of God, because and maybe that's a little confusing, but and this is just again my way of defining it, but in order to put God into a story, you would have to then take a fraction of him. You would have to invoke separation in order to create that entity in your story, thus going against kind of the whole idea of the law of one, of the one of unification, the idea that God is within all of us and in everything.
Mhm. And you mentioned something earlier about, my concept now is, imagination, a thought, then the feeling, the energy and motion connected to that thought becomes a physical matter. Look at everything. Look how cars, look how houses, look how furniture was made. Look how it all started with a thought.
Mm-hmm.
And what if that thought, that energy, I call like how I can relate to it is a greater intelligent, a life force energy. It's neither male or female, but it's in me. It's keeping my heart beating. It keeps me breathing and exhaling and inhaling, and I don't even have to think about it. Wow, I'm a part of this. This is in me, and we are experiencing life together. I can imagine, I can dream, I can feel, and then I can do. How amazing is that? That, like, once you start realizing that, like, I could change my life, change your thought, change your life. And I try to tell people, like, well, if you're sick and tired of what you see negatively, then why not change it to something positive? But we have to, with everything that's going on, it's that negative energy, that hatred, that separation, that to me is like a propaganda to keep us in that low vibration. We got to self discipline, self control. Like, you know what? I'm tired of listening to that negative energy because it affects us inwardly, emotionally, spiritually. And it's like feeding a cancer of some sort. So, how do you change that? By thinking of good vibrations, good thoughts, things that give you joy, things that make you happy, that emotion. And it's connected to all of us collectively, individually, and even in the earth based on someone that was two people that was so creative in helping us gain knowledge and wisdom. And the root of it is already in us and in the earth, our chakras. And you talk about stories. So, how does the Akashic Records come into connecting with us and who we are? Because that's a story in itself.
Yeah, and I think everybody's, when you start to talk about, I mean, you talk about reality, everybody has a different perception. And so now whenever we're stepping into this conversation of higher energy, higher realms, everybody's perception is going to start getting a little different as well. The way I personally tend to view the Akashic records is of a library, because as a human being, a physical human, all the knowledge is in the library. You can go to a library if you want to find all the knowledge. I mean, maybe an internet's a better example nowadays, but if we're going to distill it down to a physical structure, a library is what I think of when I think of the Akashic records. And it's somewhere, the best way to describe it is almost like it's this infinite energy field that exists. And it's really fascinating because quantum physics is actually starting to prove its existence. So for those who don't know, there's a theory, or I think it's pretty well proven at this point, but I'm going to just put it out as a theory, which is called quantum entanglement. And they've shown through, tests where, you can shoot off two atoms and that they are entangled. So if you do something to one atom, it'll instantaneously affect the other atom, even though there is space between the two atoms. And what this essentially expands out to is that every single word that I utter, every single emotion that I feel, any action I take, instantaneously affects a star, a planet on the opposite side of the universe instantaneously. And what also adds to this now is the idea that the present moment is the only thing that ever exists. The past and the future are merely a construct of your mind. If we have this conversation and then we meet up tomorrow and talk about this conversation, we'll both have completely different opinions and views on exactly what we talked about. So now what we do is we combine those two ideas, the idea of quantum entanglement and the power of now. So if you look at this from a human construct, everything that has ever happened in the history of the universe has occurred in order for me to be sitting here talking to you, you listening to this conversation. It goes from everything from, basically Jesus walking on earth to, the Anunnaki being here, all the way up to what shirt I chose to wear. Like this shirt probably influences decisions and words that I'm going to use in my vernacular to communicate these ideas. So where it gets interesting is that if right now is the only thing that ever occurred and everything is entangled in this quantum field, that means that we have access to information of everything that will ever occur in the totality of history and in the totality of our future. Where it gets a little weird is that infinite possibilities exist, infinite timelines exist. So whenever you go and talk to a being of higher intelligence, they can view every single timeline and they'll do their best to give you information related to your specific timeline. But if you ask them certain questions along the lines of, well, should I do this? Or when will this happen? Or how does this occur? Sometimes they'll be like, there's infinite possibilities. So the when is kind of arbitrary in a sense. And you have free will. So it's kind of difficult for us to tell you exactly how things will occur, but they can at least give you a lens of like a higher perspective of, it's so funny because they tend to distill down truths to a level of like stuff that my mom or parents have told me, like, smile or tell the truth or, treat others as you want to be treated, or like look to your lives where your energy is spent in a negative way. But it's really fascinating because they find ways to say it in which resonate. And I see this with my clients all the time. Clients, I hate saying clients, it's because I see it as like this soul journey where we're figuring it out. But people I've helped where the words I say resonate with me a little bit, but the way that it resonates with them is like, it's like turning on a light switch where they're like, they kind of always knew it, but it's like the way that it's said to them just hits at a different level where it's like, oh, like that's why that's been holding me back in all these different aspects of my life. And so again, it's so fascinating to me to watch that. And I am beyond honored and grateful to have found this way in my life to be able to help unlock people. And you've kind of said it a good way earlier whenever you're talking about the key in the door. It's like, there's the Akashic Records, the library that it is, has all these books, but these books have locks on them. And it's not like you get to open them. It's like you need to ask the right question. That would be your key in order for them to open up that book and show you what it is that you're looking for. And so again, even though there is infinite knowledge, it's not like you can say, okay, what should I know? It's like, geez, like everyone just starts talking at once. It's like, you should know all this. And it's like, well, we can't give you all that information at once because I think at some level would fry our, physical brain because you just can't download everything,
It'll be too overwhelming for us as a human being. But when you being in the Akashic records and the infinite possibilities, because energy changes, our
Mm-hmm.
perception changes. What we thought we believed in one aspect of what we were going to do, we experience something and it changes the course, the direction. So when you put it in that aspect, I'm like, oh yeah, because I could change my mind and create something, but I find that the sole purpose of why it comes here, is to one, remember of who we are, have the self realizations when we finally connect to information or energy that it's like your soul is like, hey, pay attention. This is you. This is a part of you kind of thing. This is connected to you. Or do you remember this? Yes, that's why you experienced it because now you understand why, and it's just like a jigsaw puzzle of helping you master what it is that you came to master here in this earth realm.
For sure. And that's something that I repeat as much as I possibly can, especially when doing interviews. Anytime I make a TikTok video, it's like, look, I'm explaining to anyone who's listening the way that I view reality. If I say something that doesn't resonate with you, just leave it. Don't pick it up, don't play with it, just leave it. Anything I say that does resonate with you, take it, expand on it, see how it can fit in there, fit into your puzzle piece. And I have a whole analogy about a keyhole, how, we view the world through a keyhole, and again, quantum physics backs it up. But without going too deep into that, we can bring that up later if you're interested. But the point of the matter is like, if something resonates with you, take it. If you hear something, you're like, nah, I don't really know about that. Like, that seems too far for me. Just let it go. If it fascinates you, do deeper research. But if, you're like, that's wrong, there's no way, then the information isn't for you.
Well, what about Clayton? Because this is how I've sort of discovered something about myself. Is you talk about resonating, like if it resonates with you. Well, when I hear or see, it's like, oh wow, and I feel something. It's like I'm hearing or feeling truth being presented
Mm,
to me, like my truth.
right.
And I think that that's where that connection of resonating what you hear, because then, you ask a question, you'll receive an answer. You receive the truth, especially if it comes from the authentic self.
And it's very important to note, I think, with this, that I don't know. Maybe it's a lot of people. I don't really know. But what I will say, and this comes through the Akashic records pretty frequently, is that if you're not living in a world of truth, if you're not living in the modality of being completely honest with everybody in your life, then you're not going to know what your truth is. If you are, and the interesting thing that also comes through a lot is like the idea of big and small, because we believe like if it's a small lie, it's a little white lie. In the eyes of the records, it's all the same. Whether you're lying about your net worth, or you're lying about somebody's dress, or lying about how food tastes, or it doesn't matter, because in the eyes of the records, in the eyes of the totality of everything, it's a lie. The size of it isn't important. And what's important for you to know, and this goes back to that vibrational effect that you cast with your words that instantaneously affects all atoms at once, is that if you are saying lies, you are creating an energetic imprint within yourself and the ripple field around you, which comes to a swimming pool analogy that I have. But the point of the matter is that you're embodying your signature alignment, your energetic alignment with the alignment of falsity, of lies. So if I say something to you that might be a truth of yours, but you're too caught up in lies, you might actually identify something that might be your truth as a lie, because that has become your frequency. And what happens is actually sometimes you'll see like this occurs. Sometimes it'll invoke anger actually, whenever I tell you a truth of yours, but then you're like, no, like, and you resist it. It's because you might be living in that falsehood of lies and not be truly evaluating the deepest truth. And I'm hoping that made sense, because I felt like I felt like I almost lost myself at the end there.
It's almost like a trigger.
Correct.
And there's many aspects of triggers. It's emotional energetic traumas, you
Absolutely.
know, and then, I believe that's how like there's an aspect of the religion aspect of, that creating those because there's lies in there too. And it was created for a reason to keep the fear in mankind.
Yeah. And I mean, it seems like it seems like the more I research these stories is that there's a lot of truth in them, but then it comes back to our perception, and this comes back to our keyholes that I've loosely alluded to, where if you take a very true story but then like warp your perception around it, it changes your reality because you feel these truths. And again, like I don't want to bash the Bible, like there's a lot of truths in what is written. The point though is your interpretation of it. If it's so warped off reality, you might be living in a state of fear, a state of anger. And it's because and you might be confused why, but it's because that there are truths in the Bible and all sacred texts. But I grew up with the Bible, so I'm more resonant with it. There are truths in it, but your interpretation of them are shifted. So you almost like shift yourself out of alignment because you're like, wait, there's something true about this, but I can't figure out what it is. And that's your soul like screaming at you, like, dude, you know it, let's go. Like, and it's a fun journey once you start to question your interpretation of things. Maybe that's a better way to put it is if you question your interpretation of things, it'll start that reorientation of the world for you.
And what I've learned is, because I questioned some things and reading the Bible, because I was like, well, that doesn't sound right. I mean, perfect example, Adam and Eve, and then Cain and Abel, and then Cain killed Abel. Cain got exiled, but came back with a wife. And I'm like, well, if Adam and Eve were the first male and female, where did that wife come from for Cain? You see what I'm saying? So it's those little keys that I'm like, something's not truth in this story.
I so personally, and this is a personal belief, I I understand what you're saying, but I would try to hold. I don't want to tell you what to think. In my belief system, I believe that these stories are more extrapolated out against truth, right? So I I feel as if it comes from a dogmatic place where people hold on to like, okay, there was only one man and one woman at one point in time, and then there was literally like a garden of Eve or a garden of what is it called,
Eden.
Eden? Yeah, a garden of Eden. And so, I though there might be some truth to it, I think the way that it gets depicted, and comes back to the kind of how the Akashic records work, is that they've been written in such a way such that our culture and language can understand them in a facet that makes sense for our modern day understanding. The physical structure of it might not have looked exactly like that, and we can play around with that idea as much as we want. But I don't know. I mean, a portion of this I don't know, but looking at it from a metaphysical lens is kind of where I approach it, as opposed to looking at this as well, there was definitely this, like the earth was definitely created in 7 days. And, so I guess I just want to lend that out there to anybody or yourself even.
It is. Oh, just wait. You're gonna go for a wild ride of little things. It's like the little things will lead. It's like when you ask a question, and it's like the answer doesn't come like that sometimes. It could probably take days, weeks, months, even a year. But when it does come, it's like you have that aha self realization. Oh, yeah, I remember I asked about this. And then with me, with my journey, it was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But what about da 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 da
Mm,
da? You start answering, like asking another question. So you hear truth, feel truth, but it will lead you to, because that's part of the journey of connecting to the soul essence, the soul purpose, and then letting go of the beliefs and the programmings.
right.
And then there's that emotional energetic trauma of connecting, of how that energy keeps getting passed down and manifesting itself in different forms, different time periods, different timelines, if you want to call it that. So it's like, to me, where I'm at and what now I've gained in a lot of realization is like, oh my God, we are such a fucked up, dysfunctional family and we need to get our shit together kind of thing. Like,
And there's a lot of
wake up.
confusion. Yeah.
But it's in our own pace. And I understand that. I'm like, so now when I look at other human beings, I'm like, now I understand. I wish you well, and you wake up soon. And then I just let them be. Like you're where you're at for where you're at kind of thing, you know? And you
For
just
sure.
gotta love them where they're at, but go on, you know?
Absolutely.
And it's like, hopefully you'll catch up kind of thing.
Well, I mean, everyone's exactly where they need to be for what their goal is in life, you know? It's there's you can learn something from everybody, and
Mhm.
so yeah, that's kind of what I'll say on that.
And then, have you ever, because we're talking about energy and the Akashic records and whatnot, but have you ever heard of the Celestine prophecy?
I've read that book.
Dude, did you see the movie?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you
If
gotta see the movie.
Do I saw it had really bad
Oh,
reviews, so I avoided it.
it's not like the book is so much better because it's so much more descriptive, but you get like pieces of parts. And then towards the end, I was like, oh, that's what you're talking about.
All right, no spoilers.
I'm like, I totally get it. And then it connects back to something that a great teacher and a great master, when he was here on earth, was trying to teach, but
Mm,
they got it wrong. They misinterpreted, they misunderstood. And a lot of the writings were, you know, almost 100 years later from the true experience of what happened, and it got misconstrued and whatnot 100 years later. But just seeing that, it just gave the visualization based on what I read. Because I have the audiobook, I have the hard copy, and then I saw the movie and I was like, this makes so much more sense. Oh my God. You
yeah,
know,
I have an idea of what you're talking about, but yeah. It's a good book. There's a lot of like, oh yeah, like a whole lot of like, oh yeahs, or like that's an interesting way to look at it. It definitely expands your mind to look at things. Though it's written fictionally, it certainly holds a lot of metaphysical truths to it.
not only that, but it was a key connection to Peru. And
Mm,
at about in the Machu Picchu, the Incas, and there is, which I'm doing some research and study on, these ancient civilizations and how they got their knowledge and wisdom from other highly evolved beings.
mm.
So it's just fascinating. I'm like, so that makes sense, because how did they come up with this? How did they know about this? They had to have someone, show them how to build this, how to do this, because there was heart surgeons, there was brain transplants, there was like all this stuff drawn in clays. And I'm like, how did they know how to do that? kind of. So it's like when you can, instead of looking so with blinders on, or in this one lens. And I think that's where we're at now. It's from the 3D to, going to the 5D, and how I can, how I try to explain people is like, you got a iPhone, you could go on your photo and then put it up. You could take a portrait, you could take a regular picture, but then when you go to the panoramic view, you get a wider view. And I think that's what we're transitioning into, from opening our third eye, wakening up, um, bringing our consciousness vibration up. It is showing us a bigger, wider view of what's possible in this, like what I call new world. When there's chaos happening, there's reasons why there's chaos, because it's supposed to let go of the old and bring in what's new and better, to help serve mankind and our planet. Would that be safe to say from the Akashic records?
Um, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Akashic records on that. Yet, from my perspective, I believe that that's a lot of truth there. I mean, especially with the idea of like the age of Aquarius, the age of information. We're certainly expanding in that direction. I certainly see it. From a religious background, it's really fascinating because I believe there was one point where like Christ talks about his second coming, and well, Jesus talks about his second coming. And what's fascinating is that Christ is actually a state of consciousness. It's not actually a person, and people might get that confused, quite frankly. And because he was first known as Jesus of Nazareth, then he was known as Jesus the Christ, and then he was known as Jesus Christ. And so Christ consciousness is just a higher level of consciousness. And so whenever he was talking about the second coming of Christ, he was basically saying the second coming of Christ consciousness, which is our entire planet hitting like essentially this threshold. And what's also really fascinating is that I believe that this actually came up in a reading that the universe is now actually expanding at a faster rate than it's ever expanded before. And coming back to quantum entanglement, coming back to the conscious awareness, I truly believe that that is a consequence of the fact that more conversations like this are occurring. There are more movies talking about the multiverse, talking about infinite possibilities, and just that cultural shift. Having that shift in culture is this is a is a manifestation of our minds expanding. Because I even went to see the movie, and I highly suggest anyone who loves this conversation go check it out. It's called Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I went and saw that with my dad. And it's all about quantum shifting, quantum jumping. And, I had a conversation with my dad who's in his I'm not going to date him, older than me. And I was like, Dad, have you ever I was like, this is crazy because, we have movies like Doctor Strange coming out, which is personally my favorite Marvel character. The Multiverse of Madness. You see Spider-Man No Way Home. You see Spider-Man in the multiverse. You see just so many multiverse movies coming out that it's like, I asked my dad, I'm like, was this ever like a thing when you were a kid? He was like, no, like the multiverse was never an idea, let's say in like the 70s or 80s, like nobody was talking about it. I think there was some research done in science, but like it was not nearly as mainstream as it is now. And we're just hitting that expanding inflection points where we're like, oh, infinite possibilities. Like that's just a thing now, you know?
Well, here's what I got because I love history is there was in the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s. You got George Smith, you got Zachariah Sitchin, then you've got Edgar Casey who channeled, and was getting messages, and I feel like like beings like you and me. I come from a star seed. So, and being a light worker and an energy healer.
Mm,
Okay, so and then I'm connecting with others like you and whatnot. There's like this collective, like light workers coming together to unite to help with this expansion. But
mm,
in now in this time, but there were others, but we didn't have the internet back in those times. So it was going from, I guess, from city to state and global with these messengers that were trying to. Thomas Paine was one of them. That was in the like 1700s. And there was people that were actually presenting truth, but some people tortured, executed because they didn't want the truth to be revealed to help us, gain that. So I commend them. I like thank you for your sacrifice. It gives us energetically another opportunity for other souls to come in and do the same. Like they leave, boom, someone else is going to show up.
and who knows? Maybe it's their soul coming back in. Because, I mean, the way I see it too now is, the idea of speaking your truth and being, like I don't really fear death anymore. And the way I see it is, if for some reason, if as long as I'm speaking my truth and pursuing truth to my highest frequency, it's like there's some part of me that's like, if for some reason, I go out before I'm due, like for some reason, some malevolent force takes me out, my thought process is like, well, I'll just reincarnate and it's going to happen again. So it's like, I don't know. It's weird. It's like this thought process that like if so the reason I'm bringing this up is because maybe like they have reincarnated to repeat their thing because they're like, no, I need to get this information out. I know I can do it. Like da 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 da. Take that as you will. And so maybe at some level, maybe their soul has reincarnated to carry out because they were taken out by malevolent forces. Um, I guess this is kind of hypothetical as well. So, take all this with a grain of salt. I'm kind of I've never explored this idea. This is the first time exploring it. So, it's not, it's not my, I guess my go-to talking points or the things I normally riff on that, I can talk to with a little bit more certainty. So take that or leave it.
So there's something that just came to me, and I'll have to tell you later after this interview because it just came to me. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to remind him to that that's part of it of what you experienced prior to coming on when we were in the green room. So I have to make sure I tell you that because
I
that's
mean, feel free
fascinating.
if you want to talk about it now. Feel free. Anything we talked about in the green room, I more than open
Okay,
book to
so
discuss.
we also talked about I mentioned to you about the Anunnaki pantheons. There's two stepbrothers, Inky and Enlil, and I think there's a misconception about even what was written in the Bible that. And I remember something like I read a book of Conversations with God when um Neil Donald Walsh, and he said your society and your culture and your religion was believing in something that wasn't true as if it was true. And then I look at, oh yeah, because the serpent wasn't really Satan. What
Hmm.
if it was actually God? And then the God that was like, I curse you. What have you done? You made them more like us. But in the beginning, it said, let's create man in our image. But then you go back and contradict what you said at the beginning. So, what if that was actually the devil? And then to me, I look at, okay, I see how Enlil, based on the research and the writings and the readings that I'm actually studying, that was Enlil. And then Inky was actually the one that gave mankind the knowledge and wisdom, like the fruit of the tree, that symbolic and the metaphoric way of Eve taking that bite. So when it came to that and understanding about, they called him Lucifer, they call the devil Satan, but Lucifer is actually the bringer of light. If you studied that word, the
Would you
bringer of light.
Would you like me to go into my story of what we discussed? Share that
Go
with the
for it.
people.
But that I was like, yeah, because the bringer of light. That is it, but it's in another language, and I'm trying to figure out how to speak that name in that language. I'm trying to find it,
Mm,
and I'm going to ask them like, "Hey, how do you say it in that ancient time language?" Because it was something of good, and um, it connected to help people that name.
yeah, I
From
mean,
what I'm learning and understanding, I'm like, okay, so how do you say the name? Is it actually been another name at the beginning, but now in the more modern time, from the way everything was created with bringing Lucifer into it, it wasn't really Lucifer, it was another name.
well, names are pretty powerful. I mean,
Mhm.
and I learned that. Yeah, I guess I'll. Um, yeah, names are pretty powerful. I learned that for sure. I guess my story that brought me to this illumination, let's call it, was that I had a dream, and I'm pretty connected with my dreams in the astral realm. And I had a dream where I was in my bedroom and I was like looking at the door to my bedroom, and I went to reach to grab the doorknob of my bedroom door, and it shifted up like 2 inches or maybe like a foot or so. I don't know. The point was though is that I know I didn't grab the doorknob, Well, then the door opens a crack. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. And I could tell that there was something on the other side of this door. And then it opens about a quarter of the way. And I'm like, oh, it's probably my dog. And then the door just swings wide open. My dog is not there. And there's just an energy in front of me. And so then this energy just kind of comes straight at me, hits me in the chest. I fall backwards. And I'm kind of, it's this feeling of electrocution. And I was also feeling a little afraid. And so I kind of just sat there repeating, like, I am divinely protected. I'm divinely protected. I'm divinely protected. I wake up. I'm a little bit shaken, a little bit disturbed, but I then decide to consult the Akashic records on this. I'm like, guys, like, what the hell just happened? Like, that was bonkers. Like, I've never experienced something like that. I know there was significance to that because I was so, like, energetically jolting that something occurred. And I'm like, and here's also a good testament of how the Akashic records don't tell you everything until you ask the right question. I'm like, so what was that? Like, what was that? What was that energy that went in me? And they were like, it was upgrades. And I'm like, okay, what upgrades? They're like alignment, healing, light, more knowledge, opening of your third eye. And I'm like, okay, well, what was the name of that energy? And they go, Lucifer. Now, for my background with the Bible and everything, I'm like, you let the devil inside me? Like, what? Like, I trusted you guys. Like, you guys were supposed to have my back. Why would you let the devil get into me? And they go, no, not the devil, Lucifer. And I'm like sitting there, like, just puzzled. I'm like, what? Like, what are you trying to tell me? I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, the devil and Lucifer are different. And I'm sitting there like, okay. I'm like sitting there like, I'm kind of rattled at this point. I'm like, like, this is like groundbreaking stuff to me. And I'm like, okay, well, like I trust you guys. Like, we've been through so much together. Like, I know I trust you guys, but I need something in my physical, like, reality in order for this to be proven. Like, and they're like, okay, like, that's fair. We want you to search Lucifer actually good star. So I typed that into my search engine. I think I used DuckDuckGo or Quant or something. And what pops up is articles on the history of the word Lucifer. And it started in Latin, which actually meant Venus. And then it also meant like morning star, light bringer, the person of light. And I'm sitting there and it's blowing me away because the upgrades I got were of light frequency, were of acknowledgement, alignment, opening my third eye. And I'm just sitting there like, what the hell? And then I'm looking at even more deeper, and the term Lucifer didn't shift to mean the devil until the King James Bible, which I think is like the main one that's used today. And I'm sitting there like, just my mind's exploding. I'm like, I don't even know where to go with this. Like, this is so crazy to me. And the next revelation that occurred, and this comes back to the whole power of names thing and why names and words are so freaking important, but we, for some reason, don't think that they are, is because if we go back into my dream, I had that panic, I had that fear, and I was sitting there saying, repeating to myself, I am divinely protected. I am divinely protected. I am divinely protected. And what I realized is that I recognize this. My soul, my energy, recognize this energy being called Lucifer. Yet my subconscious programming was Lucifer equals devil. But in reality, this was light. This was goodness that was coming into me. And it just broke me because I was like, holy shit. Like my perception of reality was that Lucifer equals devil. And here's the energy of Lucifer coming into me. And even though it's good, even though it's good, even though it's the truth, even though it's light, my subconscious programming was that this is evil. This is bad. Reject this. And so I think that really ties in everything we've talked about, from living in the frequency of truth, to how your perception creates reality, to how the simple changing of names can have such an impact on your experience in life. It's otherworldly.
Well, yeah, and I just recently discovered that even the name Jesus, it's two different people that people are connecting with.
Hmm.
If you look at the original name, Yeshua,
Hmm.
going back in those times, that was the name of this man who also, by the way, traveled to India, Asia, and even Egypt. This man lived in Cairo, Egypt, and there's a shrine,
Hmm.
married, had children, but in those writings that they have the plaques and all this information about this man. It's Yeshua, which in Arabic and whatnot was another form of Joshua. Yeshua, Joshua. So that makes sense. But then I'm like, well, why is everyone calling him Jesus then? If it was Yeshua, there's significance to this that I just recently found out, and I was like, are you shitting me? Like, oh my gosh, I think these people are like praying to the wrong person who is actually was physically here, but he was like the most evilest man.
Mm,
And
Jesus
I was like,
was.
oh
You're
my
saying the
God,
name.
people. Because Jesus, like Jesus,
Okay.
Isus,
Okay.
Jesus. When I say
Okay.
Jesus, what comes to your mind?
Well, the way you emphasized it would be Zeus.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. There was
Yeah.
no J because it took on a different form from somebody that was actually comes from the Roman Catholic era back in those times who wanted to be he saw I think it was his brother George. I took notes. It was George something, and he's like, no, I want power.
Mm,
I want
classic.
I want the power and I want to go into military and I'm going to conquer. And what they did was they conquered and tortured indigenous tribes. They tortured other people. Like, you're going to convert to our religion because this is it, or you're going to suffer, die, or whatnot. And he got Da Vinci to create his face as the Jesus that you see in the artwork today.
Mm,
I was like, wow, that's fascinating.
that is fascinating.
Because if you go back in those times, the color skin of people back in those times weren't white like us.
Okay.
So there was a Yeshua that actually went to Egypt, the mystery schools, studying about reincarnation, then went to India and Asia, who studied about Reiki, energy, and things like that, and was teaching it when he came back to his hometown to others. Because if you think about it, Yeshua, when he was in puberty, going through puberty, parents left and realized that, oh, we forgot Yeshua, or what people say in the Bible, Jesus. They went back to the temple and he was with the Pharisees and blah, 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 blah. But that's all you heard of him until he was in his 30s. You see what I'm saying? So there's missing pieces to to the Bible. So if you want to connect those dots, you got to study your history. If you do
For
not
sure.
learn your history, you're destined to repeat it.
Very true. And I do need to take off. I'm loving this conversation, but I do need to take off soon. So
Oh,
but this has been an amazing conversation so far. I just
thank
want to put that
you.
out there. Yeah.
Well, I would love to, be on your show, have you back on my show. I do believe I left in the description notes of how people can contact you, get a reading from their Akashic records and whatnot. And you even have courses.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a course that it's basically my template of how I figured out how to heal trauma, how to heal it in my life. I give book references that have helped me so you can get even deeper knowledge in it. Um, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, just keep questioning reality. That's really all of the message I want to spread. I mean, yeah, if you want to get connected with me even deeper, check out the links: Instagram, TikTok, Traveling to Consciousness. And that's really what I'm doing is I'm just spreading my understanding as I travel through this crazy human experience. And whatever really comes up along the way, it's a mixture of consciousness, spirituality, religion, quantum physics, plant medicine. So if those things interest you, go check out Traveling to Consciousness on whatever social media site you're on, because we're there.
And you have a podcast too, as well.
Correct. Yeah, I basically bring on people that I'm interested in learning more about them, learning more about what's going on in their life, the way they perceive reality. And quite frankly, it's been so wild for me because I've learned so much information just by having people on that I can have and they are longer. They are usually about 2 to 3 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of start off with them and try to see where they were when they were younger and how it progressed into what they're doing and how they've connected to the divine. And it's a journey. It's really a journey, and it's a journey in their life. And I think it's really important because it helps people realize that people didn't just wake up and think, oh, spirituality, like all these things you're talking about and we're talking about here. It's not like again, if we had this conversation probably 2 years ago, I would have been like, you're insane for everything you're saying. So I think it's really important to understand that this isn't something that happened overnight. It's been a ongoing process. And so my podcast really just documents my journey and understanding these new elements of reality that are not discussed anywhere at all. And so I feel like they need to be discussed. So I'm recording those conversations and putting them on the internet.
Awesome. So there's truth to be said about we are all spiritual beings having a human experience.
I could not agree more. I would even expand it out that we're multi-dimensional beings having a human experience. But yeah, I
Yes.
mean, yeah,
That goes deep.
yeah.
I'm, I'm
That's what I
keeping it
do.
at a beginner's level right now, but yes, we
Okay.
are multidimensional.
Well, as an asterisk, my podcast started out like beginner, and then it goes very quickly into like very deep. So just be warned. If it does, again, like I always say, don't if it doesn't resonate with you, don't take it. Just keep an open mind and say, what if there's some truth to this? So
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Clayton, for this moment and having this experience with you. I am so honored, humbled, and truly grateful for it. Thank you.
thank you. And I appreciate you having me on. This was incredible from our green room conversation to here. It's something that's amazing. So thank you. Thank you for sharing everything that you have with me. And this has been beautiful. And I can tell you're putting together an amazing audience. So I'm grateful to be a part of it and grateful that they could hear my voice, hear my energetic imprint that I'm putting out there.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
We got to expand it even more.
Yeah. And the universe is doing that with us as well. So Age of Aquarius is just getting started.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. I hope this was insightful and piqued your interest in learning more, opening yourself to what if you had it all wrong from the beginning and now we have a chance to find some truth. It's already in us. It's up to us to find it out. So stay tuned to more of Wake Up with KC.